Hi, I'm Russell Ruffin, and today we're in Boston, Massachusetts, and our tip this time involves the diminishing resources of news organizations. Every day, because of economic cutbacks, you're seeing news organizations get smaller and smaller, and that's a fact that can actually benefit you, and we're going to show you how. Here at our Boston area class, we discussed how having fewer and fewer reporters out on the streets can actually work to your advantage. If you've ever had a reporter show up to your office to do an interview and that reporter is also the photographer, you have it made in the shade. You're going to have pretty good coverage if you give the reporter pretty good sound bites. But just to ensure that you get good coverage, it's always a good idea to give that reporter a written news release. Now, I know what you're going to say. You don't always have time to sit down and write up a news release. Sometimes these things happen at the last minute. Well, one thing you can do is take a couple of good notes ahead of time and give it to the reporter. In other words, just put 2 or 3 facts, pertinent facts about the story, and hand it over to the reporter. The reason you want to do that is because you cannot depend on anyone to sit through a 10 or 15-minute interview and write everything word for word. For one thing, as a reporter, I can't write as fast as you talk. And even though I'm going to have a video of everything that you say, when I get back at the station, I'm not going to have time to sit there and sit through the interview a second time and take a second batch of notes. And I may have a misunderstanding of one thing that you said. In other words, you might have explained it to me the way you would understand it or the way someone else in your office would understand it, but you may not have said it in a way that I would understand it. So that's why it's always important. Take a sheet of paper. You don't have to have it voluminous. Just have 2 or 3 facts, important facts, because believe it or not, I've had many times people tell me they'll sit down with a reporter, they think the reporter has the story, but when it gets on the air or gets in print, it's nothing like they discussed. And the reason that happens is not because the reporter is being deceptive or dishonest or trying to do a number on you. It's actually because that reporter had a different conception of what the story was. They had a different understanding of what the story was. That's why it's important for you to write out a few of the pertinent facts and hand it over to the reporter. So bear in mind, when a reporter comes out and it's a one-person crew, that one-person crew is probably covering 3 or 4 stories that day. They don't have time to go in depth. They're not the I team. They're not an investigative reporter team. They're not trying to do a number on you. They're just trying to get this news as best they can. So you can help them as best you can. Give them a good sound bite, and if you can, give them a summary of what you're talking about. So when they get back to the station, they can go by not their notes, they can go by your notes. That way they can be sure that they have the facts. Here at our Boston area class, we had the pleasure of meeting numerous talented public information officers and chiefs and administrators. We always asked them to give us some of their tips. Well, we met the police chief from Hamilton, Massachusetts, who had some tips of his own.
Years ago, when most of us started, or a good majority of us started, you had investigative reporters who actually came out to the barracks or came out to the police departments, and they actually sat down with you and they'd write a story face-to-face for print media. Never, very rarely in my neck of the woods now do you see. Now I have a very small department compared to a lot of these other ones, but you don't see investigative reporters coming out to write stories anymore, and they base a lot of it on your media releases. So a lot of it, and cops hate face-to-face. You know, a lot of cops do not like going in front of a camera and doing face-to-face with a microphone in your face at a scene, let alone when they come to your PD. And all of us have been a victim of looking outside your window and seeing a big Channel 3, Channel 5, Channel 4 truck out, satellite truck in your front. And everyone bails out the back door. But the investigative reporters, they don't come out anymore. So the news for us, for a small PD, it's a lot of how your media release is written. I find the media can be a good tool, an asset. If you want good PR for your department, then make sure you have good relations with your media and write a lot of news releases and shove them out there. A lot of your news medias now want us to email them everything. They won't come into the PD and they want it to email them. A lot of it's staffing too. I mean, I've had print media I wouldn't wrap a dead fish in, and then some of them are very good though. Some of them tell the truth, and some of them kind of slant it one way. Positive PR for the department's huge. One thing I learned from Brian Garnett, who was a Channel 3 reporter who he retired off of Channel 3 in Connecticut and went to work for the Connecticut Corrections. He always said, Russ, have a good story in the can. You get a bad story, you have a bad story that's out there, you'll hit the front media, newspaper, let it run a couple days, it dies down, throw your good story out. So let that roll. Have a good story in the can. A good thing that involves kids or seniors was this big thing. If you use the kids, people are never going to look at you bad. If you use the seniors, people are never going to look at you bad. So make sure your good story involves the kids. The DA, in Massachusetts, the DA, depending on your size of your department, by statute, they do all murders, or let's just say murders. They do a lot of the serious investigations the DA can take jurisdiction over, depending on your department. And when I had a serious incident involved one of my officers who's no longer with us, and he came out and he took the lead, and Carrie Kimball Monahan is their PIO officer, and she does a fabulous job. And we would all get together, she'd write the briefs, and she'd give them to John Blodgett, who does a great job as well. He's a great guy. And he would come out and talk about the story. And he had my guy's picture plastered all over the news. And after the whole thing was done, and I did my own little critique after action, I failed. And where I failed was I never came out in front of the camera and told my constituents in town, the taxpayers, the people who I work for, that you are safe in this community. And this is not something that this is not something the Hamilton police officers condone, or this is not something that we do or we believe in or we support. I never came out and did that. And that was shame on me for not doing that. So in that area, I was like, I never supported the guys, but I never came out and told the public, this is not something that the Hamilton PD condones, nor is it something that we support. This was an off-duty police officer who went off on his own and did these actions. So that's one of those things, like an after-action thing, that I kind of critique myself on, that I didn't do and I should have done. And what I think we don't do enough is toot our own horn. In today's media, the police departments, we do a lot of good things. We really do. As policing agencies, I don't care, small, big, we do a lot of good things for the public, and we don't toot our own horns. How can you do it? Use the media. Use them as a tool. Get together with the Salem News is probably the one that writes a lot for my community. And when I first got there, I met with the editor, and I told the editor. And back then, they were having a field day with the department on numerous issues. I mean, the beat reporter won a journalist award on my department at the time. And not all of it was factual either. And that's a lot of the reason that it wasn't factual is because no one would sit down and talk to him either. No one would sit down and talk to the journalist and say, hey, listen, no, before you write the story, let me tell you this is what happened. And no one did that with him. So he went off and wrote his version of the story. Yeah. And that's when we learned, you get out in front of it, say this is what happened, and learn by it, and don't be afraid to contact the media and have them come in. I get along very well with the media. We do a lot of different things. Now, for the bit larger cities, they'll come out all the time for the larger cities. Smaller PDs, it takes a lot to get them out there, unless it's a big, juicy story. And for the small towns, and we don't have the amount of crime that you would have in the larger cities. We still have it, just a smaller volume. But it's good for the taxpayers to see what you do. This is what we do. We seized 8 pounds of marijuana and $8,000. Well, to some of the big cities, like, yeah, that's nothing huge. In Hamilton, that's huge. And in Hamilton, the tax rate's high. They want to see what the public servants are doing for them. So how can you do that? Use the news media.
If you have some tips you would like to share with our audience, by all means, send me an email. We always like to hear what everyone else is doing. Everyone is looking for a better way of doing something, and if you have something that's worked for you, we'd like to know about it so we can tell everyone else about it. So send me an email. My email address is russ, R-U-S-S, at publicsafetymediatraining.com. Send it to me at russ at publicsafetymediatraining.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to share your story.